Surviving the unthinkable, the most disturbing prison experiences ever recorded. Before this gets buried in silence, hit subscribe, tap like, and tell me in the comments if you could survive what you're about to hear, because once this starts, there's no turning back. The emergency lights painted the prison yard red and blue as officers sprinted toward cell block D. At 2:17 a.m., a distress alarm ripped through the facility, the kind reserved for riots or deaths. Inside the concrete belly of the prison, an inmate lay motionless on the floor, his body positioned with eerie precision, as if someone wanted him found exactly this way. No weapon, no witnesses, just a man who shouldn't have survived his sentence, but somehow did, until tonight. This wasn't an isolated incident. Within hours, investigators realized the inmate had been transferred twice in 3 months, first from a maximum security prison in California, then abruptly shipped overseas under a rare international exchange program tied to overcrowding agreements. His file carried red stamps: protective custody requested, psych evaluation incomplete, survival risk extreme. Detective Mark Ellison, called in as a federal liaison, stood over the scene with one question burning through him. Why was a man who survived 3 of the most brutal prison systems on Earth now dead in a locked unit with cameras that mysteriously stopped recording for 7 minutes? The inmate's name was Daniel Hargreaves, 36 years old, convicted of armed robbery. No gang affiliation on paper, but prison paper lies. In San Quentin, guards recorded that Hargreaves survived a 6-day lockdown with no food access after a guard walkout. In the UK's HMP Belmarsh, he reportedly endured months of psychological isolation that left others catatonic. In Australia's Long Bay Correctional Complex, he survived an assault that sent 3 inmates to the hospital, while he walked away without a scratch. Survivors don't just get lucky. They get targeted. Ellison's team began pulling incident reports, audio logs, and medical evaluations. A pattern surfaced fast. Every time Hargreaves was moved, someone high up signed the transfer personally. No explanations. No standard procedure. And every prison he entered reported unusual compliance from other inmates, the kind that comes from fear, not respect. Then a junior analyst flagged something buried deep in a sealed attachment. A handwritten note scanned into the system and never followed up. It read, simply, "If he talks, people die." And when investigators finally unlocked Hargreaves' confiscated personal effects, they found a folded document that stopped the room cold, proof that his survival was never accidental, and his death was never supposed to happen this way. The document found in Daniel Hargreaves' belongings wasn't a confession. It was worse. It was a list, typed, outdated letterhead, stamped by 3 different correctional systems: United States, United Kingdom, Australia. Names of inmates, dates, facilities. Besides several names was a single word circled in black ink: deceased. Others were marked missing, a classification prisons rarely admit publicly. At the bottom of the page was Hargreaves' own name, followed by a question mark. Detective Ellison felt the weight of it immediately. This wasn't random prison violence. This was a controlled environment, manipulated across borders. Someone was tracking survivability. As investigators dug deeper, they discovered Hargreaves had been placed near the same inmates repeatedly: men tied to corruption cases, gang leaders rumored to cooperate, and guards later fired for administrative violations. Every prison system insisted the placements were coincidental. The data said otherwise. Ellison interviewed a former inmate from San Quentin who agreed to talk only if his name stayed sealed. His voice shook as he described Hargreaves. He wasn't tough, the man said. He was quiet. Observed everything. People left him alone because every time someone messed with him, something bad happened later. Not to him. To them. In Belmarsh, a prison psychologist's notes revealed Hargreaves had been subjected to prolonged solitary confinement without formal authorization. The psychologist flagged it as procedural abuse, warning that the conditions could cause permanent psychological damage or provoke extreme retaliation if the inmate survived. The report was ignored. The psychologist resigned 6 weeks later. Then came Australia. At Long Bay, surveillance footage showed Hargreaves being escorted through a restricted corridor not listed on his transfer orders. The guard who signed him through, Officer Daniel Cross, was later found dead in an apparent suicide. No note. His phone wiped clean. His family claimed he'd been terrified in the weeks before his death, convinced someone was watching him. The more Ellison uncovered, the clearer it became, Hargreaves wasn't just surviving prison. He was being moved intentionally through the harshest environments imaginable. Someone wanted to see how far he could be pushed. Then a new development shattered the investigation's momentum. One of Ellison's own analysts vanished. Her access card was used at 11:43 p.m. to enter the evidence room where the list was stored. The cameras glitched for exactly 7 minutes, the same duration as the blackout during Hargreaves' death. When security arrived, the analyst was gone. So was the original document. In its place sat a single printed page. 3 words, bolded at the center. "You're next." And as Ellison stared at the message, his phone rang, an international number he recognized instantly, tied to a prison that officially denied this case had ever existed. The call came from London, routed through a secure line that hadn't been used in over a decade. The voice on the other end belonged to Sir Andrew Cole, former oversight director for the UK prison system, a man who had officially retired but never truly left. He didn't offer condolences. He didn't ask questions. He went straight to the point. Hargreaves was never meant to die in custody, Cole said. He was meant to disappear. Ellison listened as Cole explained what the records never showed. Years earlier, a joint task force quietly identified a network operating inside Western prison systems, corrupt officials, private contractors, and criminal intermediaries trading protection, silence, and strategic suffering. Inmates who knew too much weren't executed. They were tested, broken. If they survived, they were useful. If they didn't, the system labeled it inevitable. Hargreaves had been different. He endured everything. Psychological torture, weaponized isolation, engineered assaults disguised as inmate conflicts. Each transfer was a new experiment. And with every survival, Hargreaves gained leverage. He started documenting patterns, names, routes. He learned which guards avoided eye contact and which ones flinched when he mentioned certain supervisors. By the time he reached Australia, Hargreaves was no longer just surviving. He was threatening the structure itself. Ellison rushed to secure what digital backups remained. Most were gone, wiped remotely. But one corrupted audio file survived, recovered from an old prison counseling session. Hargreaves' voice was calm, almost detached. "They think this place ends people," he said. "It doesn't. It teaches you who the real criminals are." Before Ellison could process it, Internal Affairs locked him out of the case. His credentials were suspended under a sealed directive. Officially, the investigation was being reclassified. Unofficially, he'd been warned to stop digging. That night, Ellison returned home to find his apartment door ajar. Nothing was stolen. Nothing was moved, except a single folder placed neatly on his kitchen table. Inside were classified transport manifests and a final letter written in Hargreaves' handwriting. The date matched the night before his death. "I made a deal," it read. "They promised exposure in exchange for silence. But systems don't keep promises. People do." At the bottom was a location. Not a prison. Not a courthouse. A burial site. Ellison understood the message immediately. Hargreaves hadn't been silenced. He'd been erased and replaced. Because if the list was real and the network still active, then the most dangerous survivor of all wasn't the one who died in prison. It was the one who walked free, carrying everything Hargreaves left behind. And someone somewhere had just realized Ellison now knew too much. The burial site sat beyond the reach of jurisdiction, a stretch of forgotten land once used for construction waste, now swallowed by weeds and silence. Ellison arrived before dawn, guided only by coordinates and instinct. There was no police tape, no markers, just disturbed earth and the feeling that someone had already been there, waiting to see who would come. Beneath the soil, they found an empty grave. No body. No coffin. Just a laminated prison intake photo placed carefully at the bottom. Daniel Hargreaves stared back, eyes hollow, mouth neutral, as if daring anyone to claim they truly knew what happened to him. That was the moment Ellison understood the final move. Hargreaves' death had been real on paper, verified by corrupted reports and compliant officials. But the man himself had been extracted, disappeared under the oldest trick in the system: bureaucratic certainty. Once the paperwork said he was dead, no one would ever look for him alive. Ellison released what evidence he had left to independent journalists across 3 countries. Not theories. Documents. Transfer orders. Audio fragments. Names tied to dates and outcomes. Within days, oversight committees scrambled, prison administrators resigned, and a private contractor quietly dissolved its operations. The network didn't collapse, but it recoiled, wounded, and exposed. Then Ellison received one final message, sent from an untraceable device. "No more prisons," it read. "No more lists. You did your part." Attached was a news clipping from months earlier. A minor story buried on page 6. An unidentified man had intervened during a violent altercation outside a courthouse in Canada, preventing fatalities, then vanished before police arrived. Witnesses described him the same way every prison report had described Hargreaves: quiet, observant, unbreakable. Officially, the case closed with no prosecutions. Authorities cited systemic failures and promised reform. But inmates began reporting changes almost immediately. Certain punishments stopped happening. Certain transfers were canceled. Guards who once abused power suddenly requested reassignment. Fear had changed sides. Daniel Hargreaves survived the unthinkable, not by escaping prison, but by exposing it. And the most disturbing truth wasn't what he endured behind bars. It was that the system allowed it, recorded it, and expected no one to notice. If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it, because some survival stories don't end when the cell door opens.